Ready for Hatchet today. Today, we are going to quickly review, before we get started, point of view. And I know we've talked about point of view several different times. Pretty much every book we've read so far, we've talked about point of view. So remind me what the different points of view could possibly be. Lillers, give me one of the points of view.
I know third person is using their names.
Okay, third person, it uses their names. What kind of pronouns do we hear? We hear I, me, my, he, she, they. What are we?
He, she. It's saying a certain name in third person, isn't it?
Okay, it's saying the name. Josie, tell me more about third person, which is what they started with. They said third person, it's saying the characters' names.
They say him and she.
Okay, him, her, he, she, they. Who is telling the story in a third person?
A narrator.
A narrator, says Zeke. Okay, is the narrator a character in the story in third person? No, it is just a random narrator. And the narrator kind of knows what's going on, right? Okay, so what is first person? Sophie, what's first person?
What is it? I, me, and my.
I, me, my. Who's telling the story? First person. Parker, who's telling the story?
The character.
The character. Which character?
The one in the story.
The one in the story. The main character. Okay. So what is Hatchet? What person's story is Hatchet?
Third.
Who's telling the story in Hatchet? Sean.
Third.
You said first?
No, third.
Third?
Wait, no, I think it's first.
Who's telling the story? A narrator or Brian?
No, it says Brian. I think it's third. Yeah, third. Brian, maybe.
He needed something to spring the spear forward, some way to make it move faster than the fish, some motive force, blah, 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 blah. He had to invent the bow and arrow. He almost laughed as he moved out of the water and put his shoes on. He had not eaten anything yet this morning. He swung his eyes across the berries. I'm just reading parts of sentences. Rewind. Brian changed position, so he was sitting on his knees. If Brian was telling the story, would he say Brian changed position, so he was sitting on his knees? Okay, so Shawnee Poo wins. Third person. Now, there's actually two different types of third person. There's third person limited, and there's third person omniscient. Big funny word. Third person omniscient means your narrator knows everything. Your narrator knows every side of the story. He knows every character and what's going on and knows it from every character's perspective. Third person limited, your narrator only knows what's going on with one character and only knows how one character's thinking or feeling.
Yes, limited. They don't know what their dad and mom is.
Okay, so Zeke and Grayson are voting that this is third person limited. Josie, why would it be third person limited?
Because it's not talking about like what his parents are thinking is the first thing that came to my mind.
Right. We only know, even though it's a narrator telling the story, we only have Brian's perspective. So correct. Third person limited. Very good. Okay. So today we're going to read chapter 15. We'll discuss a couple of questions. And then you guys have another quizzy quiz. Every 5 chapters, we're doing quizzy quizzes. So you will have a quizzy quiz on chapters 11 through 15 today. We only have like 4 more chapters left. We're getting down to it. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 15. Hang on 2 seconds because this is still not working. What is happening?
It's having a snow day.
My TV is definitely very much having a snow day.
With that, you have to go. Not having a snow day. It's HDMI day. Airplay.
It shouldn't be AirPlay. because I'm not casting it from, like I said, there's an actual wire that's running from my, no, SmartCast is that stupid thing that shows me Netflix. I don't need Netflix.
I don't think you want me to go.
Miss Watson does not know anything about this.
I know this. It is weird because HDMI 1 is the one that.
HDMI 1 is what it should be, but it's having a snow day. Okay, here we go. Josie, yes, ma'am.
I know there's like a series of the Brian stuff. After this, read Brian's Return.
Oh wait, the tablet is for Brian Casper.
Brian's Winter would probably be the one I would want to read after this one, and I have quite a few copies of it, so I could even put some out. At least I did last year because I bought a ton of copies of Brian's Winter last year. And we're not going to read it officially as a class, any of the sequels to this. Brian's Winter is an alternate ending to this. And I read it. It's on my YouTube channel. You guys can listen to Brian's Winter. It's on my YouTube channel.
I know, I saw that.
Because I read it when we were on break in the spring. Well, whatever, coronavirus leave or whatever in the spring when we were all at home. So you can actually hear me read Brian's Winter if you log on to my YouTube channel. I'll share that with you guys later. For now, let's do chapter 15 and I'll fiddle with the TV later. You guys just don't get to see them. Okay. The days had folded one into another and mixed so that after 2 or 3 weeks, he only knew time had passed in days because he made a mark for each day in the stone near the door to his shelter. Real time he measured in events. A day was nothing, not a thing to remember. It was just the sun coming up, the sun going down, some light in the middle. But events were burned into his memory, and so he used them to remember time, to know and to remember what had happened, to keep a mental journal. There had been the day of first meet. That had been a day that had started like the rest. Up after the sun, clean the camp and make sure there is enough wood for another night. But it was a long time of eating fish and looking for berries, and he craved more food, heavier food, deeper food. He craved meat. He thought in the night now of meat, thought of his mother's cooking a roast or dreamed of turkey. And one night he awakened before he had to put wood on the fire with his mouth making saliva and the taste of pork chops in his mouth. So real, and all a dream. But it left him intent on getting meat. He had been working farther and farther out for wood, sometimes now nearly going 1/4 of a mile away from camp for wood. And he saw many small animals. Squirrels were everywhere, small red ones that chattered at him and seemed to swear and jump from limb to limb. There were also many rabbits, large gray ones with a mix of reddish fur, smaller, fast gray ones that he only saw at dawn. The larger ones sometimes sat until he was quite close, then bounded and jerked 2 or 3 steps before freezing again. He thought if he worked at it and practiced, he might hit one of the larger rabbits with an arrow or a spear. Never the small ones or the squirrels. They were too small and fast. Then there were the fool birds. They exasperated him to the point where they were close to driving him insane. What does exasperated mean? Or Sophie, what's...
I don't know what it means. I wanted to say that how it said that the rabbit just froze again, like just sat there like a statue.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of reminds me of the Toad and Tuck, where he just sat there.
Okay. She made a connection to them being frozen and sitting still to the Toad and Tuck, everlasting, that just sat there, frozen. Josie, exasperated. What do you think?
Definitely like annoying. And then like another thing that I think of is like just a sigh of annoyance and like frustration.
Annoyed, frustrated, definitely words I would use for exasperated. Zeke.
So, yeah, I gotta see. But I might have to, but just don't worry about that. So exasperated. I forgot this word, but like, it's this big word. It starts with an I, and like, that's what like sometimes like my brother gets at me, and my mom says I'm like in encouraging it, like making him happy. So like, what is it called? It's like aggravating.
Aggravating?
No.
I don't know. Sean,
Like bothering him.
it's bothering him. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's annoying. It's bothering him. Okay.
Yeah, and
The birds were everywhere, 5 and 6 in a flock, and their camouflage was so perfect that it was possible for Brian to sit and rest leaning against a tree with one of them standing right in front of him in a willow clump 2 feet away, hidden, only to explode in deafening flight just when Brian least expected it. He just couldn't see them, couldn't figure out how to locate them before they flew, because they stood so perfectly still and blended in so perfectly well. And what made it worse was that they were so dumb, or seemed to be so dumb, that it was almost insulting the way they kept hiding from him. Nor could he get used to the way they exploded up when they flew. It seemed like every time he went for wood, which was every morning, he spent the whole time jumping and jerking in fright as he walked. On one memorable morning, he had actually reached for a piece of wood, what he thought to be a pitchy stump at the base of a dead birch, his fingers close to touching it, only to have it blow up in his face. But on the day of first meet, he had decided the best thing to try for would be a fool bird. And that morning, he had set out with his bow and spear to get one, to stay with it until he got one and ate some meat. Now, not to get wood, not to find berries, but to get a bird and eat some meat. At first, something besides fish meat, okay? At first, the hunt had not gone well. He saw plenty of birds working up along the shore of the lake to the end, then down the other side, but he only saw them after they flew. He had to find a way to see them first, see them and get close enough to either shoot them with the bow or use the spear, and he could not find a way to see them.
this one.
Zeke.
I think he needs like a longer range bow and a full arrows too. Because remember he said it was going to be for close range, so he didn't put feathers on it to make it go farther.
Okay, Zeke said he thinks Brian needs to get him a longer range, make himself a longer range bow and arrow set. Sean.
I think it's a good idea to shoot over because you can use the arrow.
Okay, he says if he shoots it too far away or shoots the bird, if the bird doesn't die right away, he could lose the arrow. Yeah, it could just wound the bird and the bird fly away. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, when he had gone halfway around the lake and had jumped up 20 or so birds, he finally gave up and sat at the base of a tree. He had to work this out, see what he was doing wrong. There were birds there and he had eyes. He just had to bring the two things together. I'm looking wrong, he thought. I am looking wrong. More than that, I am being wrong somehow. I'm doing it the wrong way. Fine, sarcasm came into his thoughts. I know that. Thank you. I know I'm doing it wrong. But what is right? The morning sun had cooked him until it seemed his brain was frying, sitting by the tree. But nothing came until he got up and started to walk again, and hadn't gone 2 steps when a bird got up. Had been there all the time while he was thinking about how to see them, right next to him, right there. He almost screamed. But this time when the bird flew, something caught his eye, and it was the secret key. The bird cut down toward the lake, then seeing it couldn't land in the water, turned and flew back up the hill into the trees. When it turned, curving through the trees, the sun had caught it, and Brian for an instant saw it as a shape, sharp pointed in front, back from the head in a streamlined bullet shape to the fat body. Kind of like a pear, he had thought, with a point on one end and a fat little body, a flying pear. And that had been the secret. He had been looking for feathers, for the color of the bird, for a bird sitting there. He had to look for the outline instead. He had to see the shape instead of the feathers or the color. Had to train his eyes to see the shape. It was like turning on a TV. Suddenly he could see things as he never saw them before. In just moments, it seemed, he saw 3 birds before they flew, saw them sitting and got close to one of them, moving slowly, got close enough to try a shot with his bow. He had missed that time and had missed many more, but he saw them. He saw little fat shapes with the pointed heads sitting in the brush all over the place. Time and again, he drew, held, and let arrows fly, but he still had no feathers on the arrows, and they were little more than sticks that flopped out of the bow, sometimes going sideways. Even when a bird was 7 or 8 feet away, the arrow would turn without feathers to stabilize it and hit brush or a twig. After a time, he gave up with the bow. It had worked all right for the fish when they came right to the end of the arrow, but it wasn't good for any kind of distance, at least not the way it was now. Maybe Zeke is onto something, but
Because he's right ahead.
he did not. Fiona.
I found first person in the second paragraph of the other page.
It's not, I wondered if that was going to confuse some of you. And on my page 140, I don't know what page it is, that whole paragraph where he's saying, I'm looking wrong, I'm being wrong somehow, I'm doing it the wrong way.
It's 132.
132, great, they said on you guys' page. But when he says that, it's the narrator, because the narrator knows Brian's thoughts. So the narrator is talking as Brian. But most of this story is written when he had gone halfway around the lake and jumped. He had to bring the two things together. Looking wrong, he thought. And at that point, then it jumps into, I am looking wrong. So the narrator knows what Brian's thinking and is telling you from Brian's perspective in that particular paragraph. Okay. All right. Back to where we were. But he had carried his fish spear, the original one with the two prongs, and he moved the bow to his left hand and carried the spear in his right. He tried throwing the spear, but he was not good enough and not fast enough. The birds could fly amazingly fast, get up fast. But in the end, he found that if he saw the bird sitting and moved sideways toward it, not directly toward it, but at an angle back and forth, he could get close enough to put the spear point out ahead almost to the bird and thrust lunge with it. He came close twice, and then down along the lake, not far from the beaver house, he got his first meat.
Why don't you just get the beaver? Well, the beavers are good.
The bird had sat and he had lunged, and the 2 points took the bird back down to the ground and killed it almost instantly. It had fluttered a bit, and Brian had grabbed it and held it in both hands until he was sure it was dead. Then he picked up the spear and the bow and trotted back around the lake to his shelter, where the fire had burned down to glowing coals. He sat looking at the bird, wondering what to do. With the fish, he just cooked them whole, left everything in, and picked the meat off. This was different. He would have to clean it. It had always been so simple at home. He would go to the store and get a chicken, and it was all cleaned and neat, no feathers or insides, and his mother would bake it in the oven, or he would eat it.
You sound rich.
His mother from the old time, from the time before, would bake it. Zeke.
John said what if he could eat the beavers, but like if beavers are not an ideal food if they don't have good enough meat, and the beavers if he killed the if he killed the beavers, then the dam wouldn't be taken care of, so it could flood the lake.
All right, Sean had said, you guys missed it, why doesn't he try and go after the beaver? That seems like a bigger animal that would have meat. Zeke says, well, if he kills the beaver, then the dam will fall apart, and then maybe the lake will flood, whatever, so that might not be a good idea. Zeke also thinks that beavers aren't good meat, that they don't have enough meat on them. I have no idea. Lily.
Are you recording?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay, now he had, Sophie.
I just wanted to say, by the way, like you said, like if John would cook it in the oven and all the other sentences, I keep thinking that he's rich or something. That John was rich.
Okay. Sophie says every time he's thinking back about all the different things his mom would do, it gives Sophie the feeling that he's rich. Okay. Gives her the feeling that maybe his family was well off. Okay. And Kane says maybe you can make beaver tail flapjacks. Now he had the bird, but he had never cleaned one, never taken the insides out or gotten rid of the feathers, and he didn't know where to start. But he wanted the meat, he had to have the meat, and that drove him. In the end, the feathers came off easily. He tried to pluck them out, but the skin was so fragile that it pulled off as well. So he just pulled the skin off the bird. Like peeling an orange, he thought, sort of. Except when the skin was gone, the insides fell out the back end.
Oh,
That's cool.
ew.
He was immediately caught in a cloud of raw odor, a kind of steamy dung odor that came up from the greasy coil of insides that fell from the bird.
That's disgusting.
And he nearly threw up. But there was something else to the smell as well, some kind of richness that went with his hunger and that overcame the sick smell. He quickly cut the neck with his hatchet, cut the feet off the same way, and in his hand he held something like a small chicken with dark, fat, thick breast and small legs. He set it up on some sticks on the shelter wall and took the feathers and insides down to the water to his fish pond. The fish would eat them or eat what they could, and the feeding action would bring more fish. On second thought, he took out the wing and tail feathers, which were stiff and long and pretty, banded and speckled in browns and grays and light reds. There might be some use for them, he thought. Maybe work them onto some arrows somehow. Then he threw the rest in the water, saw the small round fish begin tearing at it, and he washed his hands. Back at the shelter, the flies were on the meat, and he brushed them off. It was amazing how fast they came, but when he built up the fire and the smoke increased, the flies almost magically disappeared. He pushed a pointed stick through the bird and held it over the fire. Zeke.
This doesn't really have anything to do with the book, but does Gary Folsom write Brian's Winter? That's all.
Okay, he was asking a question about Brian's Winter. Here we go. The fire was too hot. The flames hit the fat and the bird almost ignited. He held it higher, but the heat was worse. And finally, he moved it to the side a bit, and there it seemed to cook properly, except that it only cooked on the one side and all the juice dripped off. He had to rotate it slowly, and that was hard to do with his hands, so he found a forked stick and stuck it in the sand to put his cooking stick in. He turned it, and in this way, he found a proper method to cook the bird. In minutes, the outside was cooked, and the odor that came up was almost the same as the odor when his mother baked chickens in the oven, and he didn't think he could stand it. But when he tried to pull a piece of the breast meat off, the meat was still raw inside. Patience, he thought. So much of this was patience, waiting and thinking and doing things right. So much of all this, so much of all living was patience and thinking. He settled back, turning the bird slowly, letting the juices go back into the meat, letting it cook and smell and cook. And there came a time when it didn't matter if the meat was done or not. It was black on the outside and hard and hot, and he would eat it. He tore a piece from the breast, a sliver of meat, and put it in his mouth and chewed carefully, chewed as slowly and carefully as he could to get all the taste. And he thought, never in all the food, all the hamburgers and malts, all the fries or meals at home, never in all the candy or pies or cakes, never in all the roasts or steaks or pizzas, never in all the sub sandwiches, never had he tasted anything as fine as that first bite, first meat. All right, no, because we have to take a quizzy quiz. Now, questions for today. Why was it so difficult initially for Brian to catch the fool birds? Why was he having such trouble catching the fool birds?
You couldn't see them. They were so still that they blended.
They were so still they blended in. What was he looking for originally, Fiona?
Wasn't he looking for like one of those big buttons?
Well, I'm talking about on the fool bird. There was a part of the fool bird. Sean, what was he looking for on the fool bird? The color and the feathers. Good. But that wasn't helpful. What ended up being helpful for him to be able to see the fool birds? Riley?
The shape.
The shape. And what did he say they looked like?
Flying pairs.
Flying pairs. The fool birds.
Pointed pairs. Flying fat pointed pairs.
Fat flying pairs is what the fool birds looked like. Okay.
They're pointed fat flying pairs.
Pointed fat flying pairs. Say that 5 times fast. Okay. Sophie.
I don't know why, but it just came to my head. Just think about a parrot just flying through the sky with the wings.
Yes. Why didn't flies or mosquitoes come into the shelter when fire is built up?
The smoke. They don't like smoke.
Grayson says they don't like the smoke. Maggie, what do you think?
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Lillers.
My question is, when did Macy get here?
About halfway through the chapter. I watched her walk in and get settled. I just kept reading. All right. When Brian was cleaning the bird to eat it, what did he do with the insides? Megs.
It dropped out of the bottom, and he put them in the lake.
Okay, they dropped out of the bottom of the bird when he pulled the skin off, and so he took them down to his little fish pond. But what did he take away from all the insides and skin first before he dropped it into the lake? Fiona.
He had to take off all the skin.
He took off all the skin, but he took something off the skin before he dropped it in the pond. Sophie,
Feathers.
the feathers.
The tail feathers.
What did he say he might think about doing with the feathers? Sam, putting them as arrows. Okay. All right. So now we have your quizzy quiz. Virtual friends, those of you that are on the call, you will find out that you don't actually have to do the questions because we just did them together. And on the back of it, it has like a Dear Diary thing. It says to write a diary entry as if you're Brian. You don't have to do
I want
that.
to do that.
I'll do it.
You can do it if you want to when you're done with your test. Okay?
Okay.
It's a when you're done with your quizzy quiz on chapters 11 through 15.
What's
If
that
you
box
guys
for?
hit refresh, virtual friends, the quiz hit at 8:30. So you should have it now. Okay? I'm going to hit stop record, and then I'm going to pass out the test to these guys.